the reason I am calling you today is because, as you may know, I've got a keen interest in the pioneers that went to Japan years ago and got the chance to practice with O-sensei. Being in Japan myself, the stories about people like yourself have been very influential in deciding me to go to Japan. Now, of course, I didn't get the chance to meet O-sensei myself. But that's perhaps my way to compensate for that, is actually to gather the stories of the people who were. So as you may know, I met Alan Roddock, Henry Connor. I did meet Ken Cotier as well, though I didn't know him personally. I just attended some seminars. And because I've prompted those people to tell me their stories, of course your name and that of others came up. And then last January, during the Kagami Biraki, I was at Hombu at that time, and when they unveiled the names of the promotees, I saw that your name was there as a 8th stand, and I thought, oh yeah, that's true. I still have work to do in recording those stories. So there you go. That's what it is. Of course, I need to thank Bob Coleman for putting us in contact. He's the one who made it happen. So I guess where I'd like to start is how you start in martial arts, briefly. I've read that you started with Judo.
Yes. I started with Judo as a freshman in college. I went to a small college, Reed College, R-E-E-D. And it was, everyone had to take some kind of PE class, physical education. And there was a judo class being offered. And I thought, well, that was a lot more interesting than basketball or baseball or the usual stuff. So I began practicing judo. We had a first Q, brown belt, as our teacher. And we were in a funny loft, and I always was afraid if you threw anybody high, their feet would hit the ceiling the way O-sensei did with Tenryu. And I loved it. My home was Los Angeles, and when I went home for the summer, I spent the summer training with a wonderful judo teacher named Hal Sharp. And Hal trained at the Kodokan. In fact, he was the quote captain of the gaijin squad, or whatever they called it. And he was a very sweet, very wonderful guy. I really enjoyed training. It was a small dojo in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles. We became friends, and Hal planted the seed because I was sincere and showed up a lot. He said, Bob, you might think about going to Japan, which I had never done. And he said, my old teachers are still alive, and if I wrote to them, I'm sure they'd be happy to put you up. And I thought, wow, what an incredible opportunity. And I started thinking about it. And that thought just stayed with me for the next few years. And I would train with Hal in the summers and trained at college, although I think the judo class stopped after another year because he graduated, the teacher. Mm-hmm. And then I also started karate with Ed Parker, who was one of the very first karate teachers in the United States. And because I was, again, only there for the summer, Ed and I arranged for me to have private lessons with him. So I would drive to Pasadena, which is where his main dojo was, and we'd train. And that was another wonderful door that opened for me. So that was, so I sort of knew how to throw a punch and take ukemi. At least I threw a punch in the style of Kempo karate, which was stronger than it was fast in many ways. And then I kept thinking, gee, I'd love to go to Japan. I could train, and I had read Zen and the Art of Archery, and thought, well, what a wonderful way to get to know a culture. And I started applying for fellowships, and I never got one because I didn't have a good enough reason. I couldn't articulate, this sort of mystical notion of getting to know the soul of Japan through sweating. And I finally did at the end of my second year in graduate school. This big package came, sort of the last day of the year, school year. And I looked at it. It was from the East-West Center in Hawaii. And my first thought was, damn, they must have accepted me because this is too big and substantial to be a rejection letter. Right. And they said, yeah, Bob, if you would like, you can come for 2-year, all expenses paid fellowship. And, then I negotiated for more time in Japan, because their normal fellowship was 1.5 years in Hawaii and 6 months in Japan or China or whatever Asian country one wanted to go to. And I thought, well, I may have blown that, but I really do want more time. So I got the longer stay. While I was in Hawaii, I was friendly with another student who was a karate student. We talked about the martial arts. And one day he came up to me with this book, lovely illustrated, large size book. This is Aikido, I believe was the title. It was by Tohei. Mm-hmm. And I still remember opening it to see Sensei's picture, and I sort of was just struck by the power of his presence, if you will. And I read Memoir of the Master, that section in the book, and I loved the relatively short, I forget what the technical term is, doka, I guess. Mm-hmm. My Japanese slowly slips away year by year. When Kato Sensei was alive, he would come twice a year, and so I would get to practice translating and talking with him all the time. But now it's gone the way of a lot of things as I'm old. And I was so taken with the book, and something in me said, I've got to do this. Mm-hmm. Then I don't know what it was. It wasn't particularly logical. I had heard of Aikido before and even seen a demonstration, which I didn't think much of. This was early days in the earlier, maybe 60, 61. Mm-hmm. And in multiple man attacks, they were all holding back. Right. And I was embarrassed in a way.
That was in the US, right? The demonstration.
The demonstration was done by Isao Takahashi, who was the man who introduced Aikido to the mainland. Mm-hmm. And he was fairly competent, but again, it was sort of Key Society. Well, it was pre-Key Society. It was Tohei teach the Americans, and he was an older man. His art was really sword. He was a great kendoka, and so I saw the book and I said, I have to train. And it turns out the main dojo, the Hombu Dojo of Hawaii, was 15-minute drive from campus. So I started training a couple of times a week in the beginner's class. And I really loved Aikido and loved Sensei. And so the first day I got to Japan, I took the bus and found myself in Wakamatsucho, and it was the old dojo, which I still miss. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful traditional Japanese wooden building. And before I left, I was Yamamoto Yosuke, I think, who was the chief instructor in Hawaii, who was a great judoka and judo sensei before he met Sensei. He wrote me this beautiful letter of introduction. I mean, he sat me down in his little office and he pulled out a really nice sheet of rice paper, made ink, and started brushing a fancy letter of introduction, and told me to train well because I was representing Hawaii. I was an American. I wasn't representing Hawaii. I didn't understand that part of Japanese culture particularly. So I went in and I handed my letter in. It was a one-man office in those days, the office at Hombu, and this nice older man disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
He said, thank you, and disappeared. And I'm in the Genkan wondering what to do. Seemed like forever. And he brought me to the room next to his, which was the room that Doshu and O-sensei would sit in. And I had full-time, I finished 2 years of university conversational Japanese and 2 years of reading and writing. And I just felt like a schoolboy who stuttered. I'm so honored, Sensei. I have no word. I didn't say I have no words, but clearly I didn't. And I'm sitting right, in the small room with O-sensei and Kishomaru Sensei. And after a while, it's sort of uneasy at both sides, but there were very few foreigners around. So it sort of was a big deal. As you could see from those newspaper articles you managed to take out of nowhere. And I started training. Kishomaru Sensei said, "Did you bring your gi?" And I said, "Yes." And he took me out to the 3:00 afternoon class and paired me up with an American who'd been living in Japan. And that was the beginning of my real Aikido career. I jokingly say I learned just enough in Hawaii to get in trouble in Japan. So that's how it started.
Talking about the the foreigners who were there at the time and about that Aikido newspaper, I'll put up the clip. There's an article in the English version of the Aikido newspaper that states that you just arrived and at the same time as Henry Kono. Can you remember who was there at the time? Foreigners, except you two?
Well, it all merges. I trained every day, 7 days a week. That routine, I'm sure. And Robert Nadeau was there. In fact, he was the first one I trained with. Terry Dobson was living in Tokyo, but I didn't meet him for months. He was busy running around trying to import posters or something. Henry was there. Henry, Allen, and I were friendly, and so was Ken Cartier. Virginia Mayhew came 9 months later, I think. And she was sort of the mother of the group. We were all the sort of younger guys. There was a guy named John Days who was African American. Only one ever trained at Hombu those early years. Strong, he's very good. There's a guy named Joe Deischer, who every once in a while you see his picture and people usually don't identify him because they don't know him.
True.
But I knew Joe. Joe actually had gone to Reed. I knew him from college. And he was a student of, believe it or not, a Japanese Tai Chi teacher.
Oh, really? Oh.
And that was what he focused on, although he also trained at Hombu. And he had returned to the States, and years later, when I started my own school, I had him teach Tai Chi. So we stayed in touch. There was Joanne Shimamoto. She was training then. George Willard that came later, about a year later. And if you mention names, I'm sure I would remember them. At one point, I had a beautiful farewell card. I went back for the summer. I went home because my scholarship allowed me to do that. And there's, it's a big deal when you leave Japan. It comes from seeing, the Matson Line steamer leave. So a lot of them came to see me off, and We were very close. There's about a dozen people, a dozen foreigners. There was a Swiss man who I think there was Geert Wisnowski. Again, you study all those names, you probably remember them.
That name is the first time I hear actually.
I think he did kendo, as maybe judo as well, and that's all. You know, what happened is I created an Aikido archive built on Henry's wonderful photographs, which we archived at part of the library at my school, and it all fell apart, and it's sort of there, but it's not easy to access anymore. And I sort of took some of my best pictures to be scanned as well, my little collection. And what I'm left with is a lovely album with half the pictures gone, and some of them I have in a bag.
I was recently in contact with some students of Henry because I also want to write a piece on him for Hiden, and they've done a lot of digitizing of his pictures. That'd be nice if if one day we could get those all those pictures from those time back together, because as you said, there are some people who whose name come up quite frequently, but others who are on pictures and you're not quite sure who that may be, or in some cases I just have the name and I don't have much like Joe Daisha, I don't have much except his name. Alan has identified most people on the pictures that he showed me, but grabbing the pieces of history of those various people is proving somewhat challenging.
Yeah. Well, I started to try to do it systematically. In fact, I sat down with John Stevens, and which has lots of pictures himself, and we started going through pictures and talking about, well, who was that and when was that. After an hour, it felt like we went through only half a dozen pictures. It was a very slow process, and I haven't really seen John. It's been some years now. Well, his health hasn't been good, as you probably know, and he comes out here. There are some of the teachers here love to have him teach at their dojos, and, but it doesn't get around the way he used to.
Talking about documenting what happened then, I mean, I've had particular interest in that English version of the Aikido Shinbun, and I mean, at least one of your articles was published in there, and I know that Henry served as the deputy editor, I think was his title, associate editor, for some time. Do you have any particular information on that newspaper? How it came about, where the idea came from to get it made in English, and also perhaps how it stopped, because nowadays all the publications are in Japanese now.
No. Well, I believe it was started by Bob Nadeau. He was living close to the dojo, and he was sort of a soto deshi, and trained trained hard. And he was pretty clear he wanted to be an full-time Aikido instructor, which not many people did, not many foreigners. So, and he had no Japanese other than, can I have another scotch or a beer? In fact, there weren't many of the foreigners could speak Japanese at all. I mean, there was Henry, of course, as Japanese Canadian, and there was me,
right?
And there may have been some. Well, there were some other Japanese Americans.
Joan Shimamoto,
of course, did, and my Japanese got really quite good because I was at Keio University. I would train. My routine ended up 8 o'clock in the morning class, train some afterwards, jump on the Yamate-sen, get to KO, and then take classes and later add research as well. Um, and then I became a student of Tempu Nakamura, and one week a month I would attend his lectures at night. So that was a very full. I would often leave the house, at 7:15 or something like that. Walk to the dojo. I was staying in Ichigaya.
Ichigaya, okay. So
And
15
I
minutes.
stayed with Don Draeger.
Oh, did you? Oh, okay.
The famous house of
yet another link that we might want to explore with.
Yeah. I walked to the dojo, and then I would leave for KO, and then if I would have dinner with someone or go to Tempu's lecture, I wasn't getting back till 11 at night.
Right.
Thank God I was young and training. I could do those things.
One name came to mind. Still about that newspaper. Sid White is credited as the editor since the first issue, and as you said, indeed, Bob Nadeau has some article in the very early parts. Who was that Sid White person? I've never seen.
What was his name again?
Sid White.
I don't remember it, but people would come and often not stay for very long. So we also had some people that were in the military who would come down weekends. Some even sort of commuted to their regular jobs, but lived in Tokyo. So I really don't know his name.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, living in Ichigaya, you were literally like 15 minutes walk from Hombu. So I presume
it was more like 25.
Okay. Because I used to live in Yotsuya, so that walk.
It's a lovely walk. It's a perfect warm up.
Indeed. I used to go there jogging and back, and I'm especially interested in how life might have been at the time. And I keep asking my senpai, people who were there at the time. I asked Christian Tissier, I asked Didier Boyer, I asked people like this. Did you take some pictures of how things were? And even Henry or Alan, all they have is pictures of O-sensei and Hombu. But I want to see what life was like, and how the urban landscape, if you could call it that, was like at the time. So you were at KO. Where was the campus at that time?
I was at the. There were two campuses. There was one sort of out of town. It was a larger one. It was near Tokyo Tower.
Okay.
Mita.
So a bit further off. Okay.
And actually, when I first moved to Japan, I lived for a while in Nakano-ken. Not Nakano.
Nakano.
Yeah, and then I lived for a while. I had a nice little room in a Japanese temple right near the Mita campus. And then finally, I met Don Draeger. I knew his picture from the back of his books.
Right.
And there was a famous bookstore, one of the only ones with lots of English books on the Ginza. I can't remember the name now. And I met him. I introduced myself, and he was interested because I don't think he'd met any Americans that were training in Aikido full time.
Right.
So when a room opened up, he offered it to me, and I thought that's perfect because going to Aikido rapidly became more important in its own way than going to the university. So I moved into the house with two other judoka and a woman who worked in Tokyo that was never around. So they were. And one was Canadian, one was British of the other guys, and they were relatively new to judo, maybe Shodan or something like that.
Through Draeger, did you get the chance to practice any of the Koryu Bujutsu?
that's what he did mostly. I think he was fed up with the politics of karate, judo, etc. I mean, for example, I know Hal Sharp came back to the United States, I believe, as a Nidan, and stayed as a Nidan for years and years and years. And then suddenly, toward the end of his life, there were more Sansei, or, it was no longer the old guard in charge, and suddenly they finally promoted him to 8th Dan or 9th Dan. But yeah, there was all that political nonsense. Of course, there's politics everywhere, and I never would have gotten promoted to 8th Dan if it wasn't for Bob Corman, God bless him.
Oh, really?
Well, he pushed, and he was very good at documenting stuff. And the fact, I really was a student of O Sensei's. Not everybody realized that, but I was. And I trained with all the Hombu teachers, except my first year, I was really closer to Saito Sensei.
Oh, okay.
Then second year, Osawa Sensei. Then I went back to the States, got my degree, and went back to Japan for postdoc research. And then after about 7 years, and I built a dojo up at the UC Santa Cruz campus. It was a wonderful time to be teaching Aikido, and I was really into the meditative, spiritual part of it. And I did all the crazy things you did when you're young, having people line up and take, you had to take ukemi over 5 or 6 people, and, all that stuff. And I threw in Tohei's ki exercises, and Tempu's ki and mental exercises. So I really had quite a few students, and 3 of my students, I forget exactly, 3 of my best students sort of wanted to go to Japan and really study seriously. And they met another old Santa Cruz student who sort of dabbled in Aikido. And she said there's this amazing dojo in Shingu.